a peacekeeper among warriors. The briefing rooms smelled of sterilized metal and diplomatic tension. Screens floated mid-air, displaying tactical schematics, historical war footage, and human combat simulations, all surrounded by murmurs of doubt and the occasional sneer of amusement. Sotek, of the Zirian consensus, stood in the center of it all, thin, graceful, and utterly out of place in the mock combat armor draped over his slender frame. Zirians were diplomats, scholars, interpreters of interstellar law. They were not warriors, and they certainly were not human. Yet here he was, volunteering for a role no other species wanted. The humans cannot participate, the counselor from the Silvax delegation announced, his voice sharp. They claim our simulation is too sanitized. They called it a polite pillow fight, murmured the Valarar observer. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Even the stoic Zenth cracked a thin smile. Sotek didn't laugh. He observed the footage again, clips pulled from Earth's ancient wars. Soldiers charging through mud and artillery fire, space marines boarding enemy vessels with screams on their lips and blood on their armor, lone operatives holding impossible lines against overwhelming odds. Unpredictable, illogical, terrifying, fascinating. I will represent humanity, Sotek said aloud, his voice calm but firm. Silence followed, then a collective snort of disbelief. You, barked a Varnak war chief. You think you can simulate a human? With all due respect, scholar, you will be obliterated before the sim loads. I don't need to be human, Sotek replied. Only to think like one. Fight like one. The council approved his request, more out of curiosity than faith. A Zirian mimicking a human would provide more entertainment than insight, they thought. Let the diplomats stumble through the motions. Back in his quarters, Sotek studied in silence. He loaded centuries of human combat data into his neural buffer. Not just tactics, behavior. He watched ancient Earth cinema, read soldier memoirs, analyzed interviews from veterans of the Valkyrie front. He consumed rage, trauma, gallows humor, and defiance distilled into war. They called themselves monsters. Heroes. Survivors. Sometimes all at once. By the time he stepped into the simulation chamber, his artificial body had been calibrated to resemble a Terran Marine. Armor bulked up, strength modifiers added, voice module adjusted to replicate Terran growls and profanity. Even his neural implant was tuned to allow for irrational impulses, mimicking the chaos of a human combat brain. As the simulation loaded, placing him on the war-torn surface of a ruined cityscape, Sotek whispered a single phrase from the files he'd read again and again. Semper Fi. He didn't fully understand what it meant, but it felt right. The sirens blared. Enemies inbound. Comms crackled with static and dread. And Sotek, the pacifist, readied his weapon, not as a Zirian, but as something new. Something human. Welcome to the drop zone. The sky was fire. Explosions ripped across the simulated urban battlefield. Buildings groaned and collapsed under orbital bombardment. Smoke twisted in unnatural colors, and the soundscape was a blend of shrieking metal, weapon discharges, and distant, echoing roars from enemy creatures coded into the scenario. Sotek crouched behind a shattered wall, pulse rifle trembling in his hands. His armor was heavy, cumbersome, designed for raw strength, not his lithe Zirian frame. Sweat, artificial but convincing, trickled down his neck. Squad Sigma 6, regroup, barked a Sarn commando over the link. Fall back to the waypoint, standard protocol. No, someone screamed, one of the insectoid yell. They're flanking. Protocol will get us all. The scream cut off in static. The Sim's enemy, an AI-designed faction modeled after predatory hive beasts, was evolving. Faster, smarter. Predictable tactics failed within the first 5 minutes. Half the squad was already down, routed by enemies that anticipated their every move. Sotek had followed the Galactic Council's standard playbook. Take cover. Preserve resources. Maintain unit cohesion. It had fallen apart instantly. Now he was alone, isolated, trapped. Then something changed. Sotek spotted an enemy unit advancing down the alley, scuttling, armored, armed with plasma claws. He had seconds to act. He stood up, exposed himself, and screamed, "Hey, ugly!" He fired a warning shot, not to kill, but to provoke. The enemy turned. Sotek grabbed a flaming metal rod from the rubble, waved it like a torch, and charged. The creature hesitated, just long enough for Sotek to dive between two support beams. He triggered a thermal grenade, tossed it behind him, and sealed the exit with collapsed debris. A temporary win. Breathing hard, Sotek blinked. What had he just done? That wasn't council protocol. That was improvised, reckless, human. He reviewed his HUD. Ammo low, squad scattered. Options, none. And yet, he remembered a Terran phrase from an old battle memoir. When in doubt, cause chaos. So he did. Sotek scaled a ruined tower, scrawled taunts in human script across enemy-scouted zones, hacked a council bot to dance and sing Earth war chants in the middle of a kill zone. The enemy became confused, erratic. They broke formation. Some even retreated. Meanwhile, Sotek's erratic behavior rallied the survivors. A Zinth trooper, bleeding simulated oil, limped to his side. "You're insane," she gasped. Sotek grinned, an awkward, terrifying expression on his Zirian face. "No, I'm human." From then on, Sotek stopped following rules. He played loud Terran music through comms mid-firefight. He threw rocks when out of ammo. He led a charge with only a half-empty flamethrower and a scream. His allies, confused at first, started following his lead. Not because he was right, but because the enemy couldn't predict him anymore. And unpredictability, Sotek realized, was humanity's deadliest weapon. The council watched in stunned silence. What they had expected to be a farce was becoming a demonstration. Not of strategy, not of protocol, but of raw, unfiltered human war. Becoming a monster. The war beast screamed as its shell cracked under a barrage of plasma fire. Sotek ducked behind the smoking wreck of a hover tank, his pulse rifled down to its last cell. The battlefield around him was chaos incarnate. Twisted metal, fractured terrain, and half a dozen species fighting like cornered animals. And all of them were following him. Sotek barked orders into the comms, his voice guttural, rasping with exhaustion. "Zenth, flank left. Use the vents. Core, draw fire with your shield. I'll distract the big one. You'll die," Core growled. "Probably," Sotek said, smiling. He vaulted over the wreckage, roaring in defiance. His once graceful Zirian stride was now a stomp, heavy and brutal, matching the Terran gait he'd mimicked from countless videos. The war beast, 10 feet tall, plated in glowing chitin, turned toward him. Sotek didn't stop. He threw his last grenade directly into the thing's gaping maw. It swallowed it by reflex. He dove aside as the explosion tore through its face. Blood, purple and steaming, splattered across his armor. It wasn't enough. The beast staggered, still alive, and roared back. Sotek rolled onto his back and pulled a broken support strut from the ground. A primitive weapon. A last resort. He leapt, driving it through the warbeast's eye. The thing collapsed with a final death rattle. Silence fell across the simulated battlefield. Sotek panted, bloodied and covered in soot. Around him, the few surviving soldiers, Valarar, Zenth, Yul, stood still, stunned. They stared at him not as a Zirian, not even as an alien, but as a warrior. He limped toward the center of the ruined plaza, where the final command beacon pulsed. Enemy reinforcements were inbound. The simulation wasn't over. A voice cracked through the comms. Council command. "This is Overseer Talex. Stand down. The simulation has exceeded emotional thresholds. We are aborting." "No," Sotek interrupted. "Let it finish." A pause. "Sotek, this was never meant to reach lethal trauma states." "I know, but humans don't stop when things get messy. They finish the fight." He disconnected the override. Around him, the aliens adjusted formation without question. They didn't ask why. They didn't speak. They followed. And Sotek, once a peacekeeper, realized something dark and profound stirring in his chest. He liked this. The adrenaline. The improvisation. The way fear sharpened every decision. He finally understood what he had only read about. What human veterans called combat flow. where thought and instinct fused into something primal. Not logical, not controlled, but effective. The reinforcements arrived. More beasts, more death. Sotek led the charge, wielding a looted enemy cannon like it was born in his hands. He yelled a human war cry from the First Lunar War archives. "Come and take it!" The final wave crashed into them like a storm. The plaza burned. Armor cracked. Screams echoed. And Sotek stood tall until the simulation finally flickered out, his body collapsing the moment victory was registered. Not as a Xerian, not as a mimic, but as something new. A monster. A soldier. A human. The debrief. The simulation chamber dimmed. The battlefield vanished, replaced by sterile white light and the hum of diagnostic drones. Sotek lay on his back, panting, armor scorched and twitching from neural feedback. Medtechs, real ones, rushed toward him, voices sharp and urgent. But he wasn't listening. He was still on the field, still holding that cannon, still hearing the final roar of the last enemy falling. Only when the chamber doors hissed open and silence blanketed the room did he look up and see them. The council, representatives from 28 species. Warriors, scholars, tacticians, diplomats. They stared down from the observation gallery, their expressions unreadable. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Overseer Talex stepped forward, his silken robes pristine and out of place in the aftermath of simulated war. "You should not have survived," he said coldly. Sotek slowly rose to his feet. Every limb ached. His simulated wounds had carried residual phantom pain, another feature added to mimic humanity's resilience under suffering. "I didn't survive," he replied. "The Xerian did not. The soldier did. You became one of them," Talex said. "You think this proves something?" Sotek nodded. "Yes, that we've all misunderstood them." He walked forward, dragging his broken helmet in one hand. "You call humans unpredictable, dangerous. You design scenarios with them excluded because they don't follow rules. But you never asked why they fight the way they do." Talex folded his arms. "Because they're primitive." "No," Sotek said. "Because they're cornered." He looked at each delegate. In every simulation, the council builds around control, around projections and formations. But humans fight like creatures who've had to earn every inch of survival. Their chaos is not madness. It's memory. The Zenth War Mistress stepped forward. "You suggest we adopt their methods? That we abandon coordination?" "No," Sotek said. "I suggest we understand them. Because if we don't, we'll never predict them. We'll never stop them. And we'll never be able to fight alongside them." Another pause. Then the Yul tactician clicked her mandibles. "You fought like a berserker." "I fought like a human," Sotek corrected. A new screen lit up behind him. Combat data. Split-screen footage comparing his actions to archived human battlefield records. Identical maneuvers. Psychological pressure tactics. Improvised strategy under trauma. He hadn't just simulated a human. He'd become one. Talex's gaze narrowed. "So you believe this? Unpredictability is their strength?" "It's their weapon," Sotek replied. "And their warning." He looked down at the broken helmet in his hands. It was still warm. Scarred. They don't fight for glory. Not really. They fight to win, even if it costs them everything. He turned to the council. "The next time you consider excluding humanity from your war plans, remember this day." A long silence followed. Then one by one, delegates began to rise. Not in protest, in recognition. The vote to reinstate humans in council simulations passed unanimously. And as Sotek walked away, he left behind more than a role. He left behind the last remnants of a peaceful diplomat. He was something else now. Not quite Xerian, not fully human, but something the galaxy would never underestimate again.